Hey everyone, today we are going to start with a series in the first of two videos on models of memory. And the first one we're going to talk about today is the multi-store memory model. And this is pictured below. And I'm going to be talking through each one of the three stores of information that are part of this theory or model. So let's get started. So the multi-store memory model is built on the belief that as information is gathered through the senses, it enters into what is called sensory memory. And this lasts for just a couple seconds. And if information is paid attention to, a small amount of the sensory information will pass to short-term memory for further processing, and the rest ends up lost quickly. So if you think about what sensory information is, it's really an idea of what you see, what you taste, what you smell. All of those things are part of sense memory. And for the most part, we just end up forgetting that information. We sort of chuck it by the wayside because it doesn't matter to us. But small snippets of that is going to move into short-term memory. And after about 30 seconds in short-term memory, if that information is paid attention to, and if that information is then encoded and transferred into what is called long-term memory, then there is a chance that that information will then be remembered for life. And if you put something into long-term memory, it is there for good, even though sometimes we forget some of our long-term memories. All right, so sense memory again is not under cognitive control. It is an automatic response to the reception of sensory information. All information in long-term memory will have originally come from sense memory, although it is unprocessed at the time that it's in sensory memory. And each sense has its own store of information. Much of it largely fades unless it is paid attention to. And it's a limited duration for each of these stores, but the amount of time differs per store. So you could have more images that you remember than amount that you remember smelling, so to speak. And one example of sense memory that's been, put into my own long-term memory is this cleaner that was used at my daycare. And even to this day, for whatever reason, it just stuck in my memory. And to this day, when I smell that type of cleaner, it immediately brings me back to those memories of walking into the daycare, even though, that was 25 years ago at this point. So that is to say that sometimes our sense memory, because of the repetition of going in every day and smelling that cleaner, and maybe my mind thought of it of some importance or I paid attention to it, it did end up in long-term memory. So in terms of how we view sense memory and evaluations of it, there is evidence that exists that the iconic store or visual information can hold 15 to 20 images. But the capacity of other stores is not necessarily as well studied. It becomes harder to measure out how much that could be. And then the brief duration of sense memory is seen as due to physical traces, also known as engrams, that fade quickly. And it's a biological explanation that can also be explained from an evolutionary perspective, going back to what we talked about with the biological level of analysis. People only need to focus on perceptual information with an immediate survival value. And so most of that gets chucked out because it's not important, and you begin to remember it. It's only through repetition that we take some of those sense memories and put it into our long-term storage. The next type of store here is short-term memory, and this temporarily stores information that is received from sense memory, and it also temporarily stores information that has been retrieved from long-term memory. And that makes it a very active and changing memory system. Oftentimes it lasts about 30 seconds, and so again, if it is sense information that has not been paid attention to or encoded in some way, then it's most likely that it's going to be forgotten and not put into long-term memory. As far as encoding capacity and duration of short-term memory, as I said, it lasts for about 30 seconds and it has very limited capacity, 5 to 9 items or chunks. And you can increase the amount of information that is put into short-term memory by including these chunks and combining things together in order to remember them all at once. So for instance, if you were repeating back a phone number, you would not say 440, and then the rest of the number, right? You would say 440, 235, 5281 or something like that. And that is not my phone number, just so you know. But we have just chunked 10 numbers into 3 chunks. And so it allows us to remember more information than we could have in the past. And then we also can extend the usefulness of that information and our memory of that information through rehearsal into long-term memory and organizing it and putting it in there in some way. As far as how people have evaluated short-term memory and the short-term memory store in the multi-store memory model, age and practice can also influence short-term memory. In some ways, they can alter attention deficits, and attention deficits can alter memory, I should say. And then also, there are individual differences in short-term capacity. Most people are in the 5 to 9 range. Some people could be as far as 5 to 20 items. And then most codes are done acoustically, so how we hear things, while others are done visually as well. And so the ways in which we encode information oftentimes is either through sound or through visuals. All right, for long-term memory, the storing of information for long periods of time. This can last from 31 seconds after we've heard something to a lifetime. It must have passed through the sense memory and short-term memory first, and there are several different types of long-term memory. So the first is semantic, what something means, like definitions, understanding, those sorts of things. Episodic, when something was learned. Procedural, how to do something. So how do I fix a doorknob? That would be procedural memory. How do I drive a car? How do I pick up this pencil and write? How do I form a paragraph? All of these procedural things. And they're not all of equal strength. Some are easier to recall than others. And they are spread through several brain regions. That's something we've discovered as we've continued on. So it's not necessarily just in one area of the brain. As far as encoding capacity and duration for the long-term store, coding involves the form by which long-term memory are stored. So how we and the means by which information is shaped into representations of memories oftentimes dictates how we then remember back that information. And when we talk about thinking and deciding, that can often be the basis for some of our biases. The deeper the level of processing of occurrence, it leads to the stronger coding. The more that you have sort of packed it in there and made it really nice and organized it in some way as to remember it, the greater the chance is that you will remember it. And then the capacity of long-term memory is unlimited. Info may be lost due to decay, so you don't retrieve it for a very long time and interference, but our brains don't necessarily lose info because of a lack of space, usually. And then if originally well coded, the memories again can last a very long time up until you die and be very vivid. So as far as evaluation of long-term memory, again, there are several different types of coding. Most are acoustic or visual, but there are others than that. Research, again, can't determine a finite amount of memory, which is why capacity is currently limitless. We could find out that there is a limit on how much we remember. And then there is a possible evolutionary basis for long-term memory because certain animals have been shown to have it, and maybe a product of natural selection. Those who are most equipped to continue to survive may need longer stores of long-term memory storage. All right, so in terms of how we evaluate the multi-store memory model, just a few facts here. It is the first memory model. Research has supported separate stores of sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. And even amnesia cases have supported the model, but it is oversimplified in some aspects. It assumes that there are only single short-term memory and long-term memory stores. As we talked about, there's many different types of coding. And then memory capacity, as shown by Cohen and Leventhal, cannot be measured purely in terms of the amount of info, but by the nature of the information to be recalled. And so that would be a criticism of this oversimplification. And it does not, the model itself does not focus enough on the process of memory. It just sort of says it goes from sense memory, if you remember that, it goes to short-term memory, if you remember that and encode it and retrieve it, it goes from long-term memory back to short-term memory as well. So in terms of a concept that's related to the multi-store memory model is the serial position effect. And this is the tendency to remember things that are first and last items on a list better than items in the middle. And this is based on two effects. Either the primacy effect, you either remember things at the start of the list, or recency effect, you remember things at the end of the list. And both of these are part of the serial position effect. And so we're going to see a study here by Glanzer and Cunitz from 1966, and this is going to be one of the possible studies that you could do for your IA. So if you so choose to do that and look at the multi-store memory model. But the aim of this was to investigate the serial position effect with and without interference from a filler activity. And a filler activity in this case is going to be an activity that sort of interferes between them reading the list and you recalling the list. So an activity between those two things to try and get you to take your mind off of the list itself and not just sort of repeat it in your mind and spit it back that way. So the procedure, they took 46 enlisted Army men. They had a series of 15-word lists that were read out to participants. And after hearing all the words, participants were required to do a free recall task one of three ways. So either they did the free recall task immediately, trying to recall all these words. After hearing the list, they had a filler activity that was counting from 10 backwards for 10 seconds, or they had a filler activity for 30 seconds. And if we think about the short-term memory, right, we talked about how it lasted 30 seconds. And so the potential for this filler activity that took 30 seconds might say some things about the serial positioning effect, but also the multi-store memory model. And so each participant, again, given 15 lists, 5 for each of the 3 conditions. The order of the conditions was random. So everyone in this repeated measures design experiment ended up going through the 3 different conditions. So the results, the condition without the filler task Both the aspects of the serial position effect could be observed. They remembered the start of the list and the end of the list, not so much the middle. The condition with the filler task, the primacy effect stayed, but the recency effect disappeared in this 30-second task. And so they remembered some of the items from the start of the list, probably because they were trying to repeat it over in their mind. Think about a list of items that you would be read. You're more likely to try and remember as much as possible, and so you keep repeating over and over in your mind the first 3 or 4 items. So the conclusion was that this fit into the multi-store model. Short-term memory and long-term memory, in this case, were also 2 separate memory stores, and the information moved from short-term memory to long-term memory if it was rehearsed, but gradually it would decay if it was not. I'm sure if you ask these people a week later, they couldn't remember 5 of the words from the study. And also, it showed that the duration of short-term memory was around 30 seconds as well. So I just wanted to put here another picture of the multi-store memory model. Again, we start off with the sensory store. If attention is paid to those sense memories, it moves into short-term memory. If memory is if it's not paid attention to, if it's not rehearsed, then the information is lost. But if it does, it's transferred into long-term memory where it could be retrieved and rehearsed. If you have any questions on the multi-store memory model, please reach out to me, and I hope you all have a great day.